제가 질문을 하겠습니다. 강연을 들으면서 이제 한국 사람으로서 떠오른 거는 예를 들면은 북한의 김정은, 어, 김정일이죠. 김정은의 아버지. 김정일이 영화광이었고, 그래서 굉장히 많은 그 필름 아카이브를 갖고 있었습니다. 그리고 또 예를 들면은 한국의 유명한 그 감독이었던 신상옥 감독이 부인인 최은희와 북한으로 가서 그곳에서 또 그 체제 하에서 영화를 만들었어요. 물론 돌아가셨지만은 근데 이제 신상옥 감독이 여기에 있었을 때 한국에 남한에 있었을 때 만들었던 영화와 그쪽으로 북으로 넘어가서 만든 영화는 어, 굉장히 다르죠. 다른데 또 일면 또 비슷한 성격의 영화도 있습니다. 뭐 예를 들면은 쌀이라는 영화가 있는데 그게 이제 박정희 정권 저희 한국 역사에 대해서 뭐 조금은 아실런지 모르겠지만은 70년대 박정희라는 대통령이 그 어떤 독재 정권 시절에 그 말미에 대단히 프로파간다적인 그러니까 그런 영화를 만들기도 했었습니다. 그러니까 남과 북 양쪽에서 프로파간다적인 영화를 만들기도 이렇게 했었었는데 이거는 하나의 예이고 어쨌든 영화적인 열정이 넘친 독재자가 있었다는 사실이고 또 그것을 이용하는 작가가 또 있고 그러니까 이거는 굉장히 극단적인 경우이지만 예를 들면은 그 영화에 대한 검열이 있잖아요. 그럼 검열에 대해서도 어, 상당히 많은 필름메이커나 아티스트들이 그것에 저항하거나 반항해서 어, 두려움을 무릅쓰고 작품을 만들기도 하지만 또는 그것에 그 편승해서 거기에 맞춘 자동 검열을 하게 되기도 합니다. 그래서 그 결과적으로는 만들어지는 이미지들은 그게 어떤 왕정 정치 하에 있어서 그것이 왕이 통제를 한 어떤 이미지든 혹은 거기에 편승한 어떤 해서 살아남기 위한 어떤 뭐 그 극단적인 선택일 수도 있고 또는 무의식 중에 어 만들어진 그런 작가의 작품들 있을 수 있죠. 그래서 정말로 순수한 작가의 어떤 주체적인 시각이라는 게 과연 있을까 하고 질문을 가질 수도 있을 것 같습니다. 이거는 조금 극단적이긴 하지만은 그래서 지금 말씀 그러니까 예를 들어주신 이런 그 부분들에서 특히 예전에 있는 푸티지 작품들을 이제 굉장히 세밀하게 분석을 해주셔서 이렇게 보면서 굉장히 흥미로웠던 그런 부분인데 이게 현대에서 그게 태국이든 혹은 인도네시아 혹은 싱가포르의 경우도 해당되는 부분이라고 생각하는데 정치적으로 어, 좀 더 작가들이 이 심리적으로라도 그 위축되면서 어쩔 수 없이 이렇게 종속되는 그런 현상에 대해서 어떻게 음, 하고 싶은 말씀 있으신지도 궁금합니다.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what you've described, the complex, I guess you could say, anticipation of sovereign action or sovereign authoring or sovereign editing. You know, I mean, if we could think about censorship, censorship, of course, is a very invigorating term. And in Southeast Asian art history, where I'm the context that I'm working in often, it's a very mainstream narrative, right? It's a mainstream way of telling the story of contemporary art in Southeast Asia. Censorship has a very prominent place in that history and that discussion. Sometimes I think to the point of absurdity, but in any case, you know, you cannot really avoid it. And I think the complex jeopardy, if you like, that you've described, in which an artist may need to please a dictatorship somehow or be instrumentalized by it knowingly, whether under duress or otherwise, and this is something again that we find in many different places. And therefore, I suppose the habits of self-censorship or the habits of authorial reserve, I think, would be a better term for me. Where is your authorial sovereignty reserved? Actually, where do you suspend it? In anticipation of the actions of sovereignty proper, or of a sovereign. I think I'm going out on a limb here maybe, but I think that's the norm for a lot of Southeast Asia. I think that's actually the norm. And it manifests in the prevalence of self-censorship, what is often called self-censorship, which I think is also a very narrow term to describe a very wide range of strategies. Self-censorship is the norm in that part of the world. You know, that Southeast Asia doesn't have a strong tradition, an old tradition of individual authorship that lent itself to the sorts of celebratory individualism that we saw in Western modern art, right? And I don't know about anywhere else, but I have a feeling that one could generalize elsewhere in Asia along similar lines. And in different places, that heroic individualism, I think, has been taken to more actively or more deliberately or more successfully, in some places more than others. But of course, right across the so-called free world part of the Cold War divide, we have this kind of energy, this debate in art history about you know, a kind of individualism associated with, let's say, modernist abstract painting and its instrumentality for the purposes of propaganda and so on, or soft power, if you like. And other forms of authoring that that maybe don't go by way of that individual. I think this is overall what I'm hoping to put on the agenda with this research, is that we can enter into questions of authorship, even, and I think we saw yesterday with the films that the workshop participants brought here. I think we saw this complexity plain as day, like really very directly, that notion of an individual author is very, very hard to rid ourselves of. It's very, very hard to put aside. And indeed that probably for most creative people, there isn't actually a desire to do away with that sort of authorial sovereignty. So, but you know, a project like the workshop, I think, demonstrates in great detail, you know, just how enduring that paradigm of autonomous individual sovereignty is. Yeah. I hope that's kind of a messy answer.
작품을 제작하고 있는 작가분들도 계신 것 같고 그런데요. 질문을 예, 없으시다면 개인적인 질문을 데뷔트에게 하고 싶습니다. 작가의 어떤 주권성이라고 하는 것이 근대와 현대로 이렇게 옮겨가면서 어떤 변화의 과정이 있을 거라고 생각합니다. 지금 예로 들으셨던 이런 어떤 정치적 체제 안에서의 어떤 형태, 즉 완전히 종속되는 어떤 그런 작업자, 노동자로서의 예술가의 문제도 있지만, 예를 들면은 저희 프로그램 1에서 보여줬던 작품, 두 편의 작품에서도 나타나는 디오라마를 만드는 예술가처럼 예술가의 주체성이 발휘가 안 되는 그런 지점도 있고, 근데 한 가지는 또 재밌는 거는 이제 아프리카의 예술 중에 뭐 토우라든가 좀 전에 이것이 누가 만들었는지 우리가 알 수가 없는 그런 작품들의 경우, 작가 미상의 경우에 같은 경우, 즉 작가의 존재가 사라진 작품들도 있잖아요. 그랬을 때 우리는 그러니까 질문을 가질 수 있을 것 같아요. 이 작가가 누군지에 대한 질문, 그리고 또 하나는 하나의 사물로서 저희에게 던져져 있는 어떤 것, 사물로서 인식할 때에는 박물관에 놓였을 때에 이게 좀 오래된 작품의 경우에는 아예 그 관람객이 이게 누가 만들었는지에 대한 질문조차 던지지 않는다라는 거죠. 그냥 이거는 하나의 도자기, 이거는 그냥 그 왕의 무슨 왕관 뭐 이런 식으로 그랬을 때 작가가 뷰어가 보는 사람이 가지게 되는 두 가지 어떤 양가적인 그런 측면도 있는 것 같습니다. 그래서 보는 사람이 그 하나의 어떤 그 작품 혹은 사물을 대할 때 두 가지 이 자세, 태도와 관련한 어떤 에서는 어떻게 생각하시는지도 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
Let me go back a bit before I answer the kind of viewer of art question. There's multiple ways, I hope, of kind of recalibrating our concept of an artistic sovereignty. Lurking in the background of this presentation is Michel Foucault and an essay that he wrote in a lecture that he gave actually in the late 1960s about authorship. And one of the things that it teaches us, I think, very convincingly, or very persuasively, at least for me, is that these are contextual principles, right? There is no kind of transcendent idea that binds me to my work. My status as an author is a kind of socio-legal agreement that comes about by way of discourse, right? And the way Foucault explains it is that he says that, the author's function, what he calls the author function, is to generate and circulate discourses. Right, so this takes us already away from the sense we might have of a kind of priapic creative individual, or this takes us in another direction. It takes us to the collective, to the social, to the mass, indeed, or to the institution, or to the viewer. Right, so I think that in Foucault's reckoning with authorship, we get a lot of options. But I don't think one of the things where I think his contribution reaches a certain limit is that that regime that he describes doesn't really admit God, which is in keeping with his times. I think it doesn't really admit the monarchic sovereigns anyway that I've been talking about, which is in keeping with his culture. And so I think there are limits to that, even however questioning and skeptical and thorough analysis of what authorship is. Even it sort of comes up against a certain sort of end point, that doesn't account for some of the things that I've shown, I think in some of these monumental architectural statements even, we see a kind of authorship that is not simply about a circulation of discourses by empowered institutions, right? But which has recourse to what Blanchot called this other order, some other order, perhaps some other kind of power. I'm not saying that power was Imelda Marcos, right? But somehow the Marcos regime had managed to channel some other power, I'm suggesting. And I think Ugnayan is a very good kind of case study in that, in a sense, because it is a power that is, for all of its pre-modern scope, is nevertheless modern electronic media that really permits it, right? It's conceived by a concretist within the kind of mediatic paradigm of the moment, right? This is almost perfectly contemporaneous with the launch of the first satellite by a third world nation, which was Indonesia. To come back to the last part of the question, the viewer's sovereignty, I have to admit, is not something that perhaps the viewer's role, is not something that I've gone very far yet to think about. But I suppose just to round on the lecture, what I'm hoping to suggest with the analysis of the coronation film, what I'm hoping to suggest is that it's not the artist, actually, it's not the author that becomes sacralized in this process, but the medium itself, right? And so for the purposes of the viewer, this means that any viewer in this, let's say, mediated modern viewing scenario is partaking of the sovereignty, not just that is represented, but is also at the same time unavoidably partaking of the sovereignty of the medium that has been sacralized in this process, right? It's almost like I'm saying what's happening in this film, the effects are not just effects on monarchy, right? The effects of this film are also effects on cinema. And that is why you can have a film like Api Chatpong's The Anthem, right? That is why you can have circulating in transnational global media networks pictures of these poor women bowing and scraping before this creep, right? This is an anomaly in our world that I think needs to be explained. So, yeah, I mean, that's not quite answering the question about the viewer, but I need to take that one on notice.
오늘 발표 굉장히 흥미롭게 들었는데요. 맨 처음에 사실 모리스 블랑쇼의 스페이스 오브 리터레처를 인용할 때 이것이 어떻게 뒤에 모나키나 마제스티와 관련된 스브리니티가 주권과 관련해서 얘기가 될지 사실은 조금 의문이 있었습니다. 근데 이제 방금 전에 설명을 한 것과 연관해서 이제 제가 이해하기로는 사실 모리스 블랑쇼가 얘기하는 work itself의 주권이 사실은 되게 리더, 그러니까 뷰어나 리더의 주권을 어떻게 굉장히 자유롭게 할 것인가, 혹은 그것과 관련해 가지고 그 작품 그 자체의 주권이 사실은 굉장히 살아 있을 수 있는가라는 질문과 관련이 있다고 생각하거든요. authorship보다는. 근데 이제 이 부분이 사실은 발표 안에서 사실 조금 제가 계속 궁금증을 가졌던 부분이기도 하고 어떻게 설명될 수 있을까 좀 그런 부분이 있었는데 이제 방금 전에 설명한 부분에서 조금 해소가 된 것 같긴 한데 혹시 조금 더 설명을 이렇게 부연 설명할 수 있는 부분이 있을지 좀 궁금합니다. 그러니까 왕정이라는 것과 관련해 가지고 사실은 왕정의 필름 자체가 실제로 그것을 보는 지금 오늘날 여기 우리를 포함한 그것을 보는 오디언스나 이제 뷰어들의 주권과 사실은 관계들 그리고 복잡한 당시의 여러 가지 시대적인 혹은 모더나이제이션의 굉장히 복잡한 상황을 다시 그 자체로 읽어 나가는 어떤 과정과도 굉장히 관련이 있을 수 있다고 생각을 하는데 사실 그 내부에 많은 레이어들이 굉장히 복잡하게 연결돼 있다라는 것을 이해할 수 있지만 조금 더 설명해 주실 수 있으면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of a kind of practical situation in which the viewer's sovereignty is somehow sovereign or manifest. And I think about what I've been seeing in the museum around the last few days in these galleries. I think there's maybe something to be said for attention and attention span. I think a lot of people come to museums because they want a different sort of concentration, maybe. And that's probably to be distinguished somehow from the kind of concentration that we have zombie scrolling Instagram, right? We come here for something that's somehow different. I'm not saying it's you know, I'm not saying it's to be sanctified or that it's holy in some way, but simply that there's a different kind of engagement mentally that we, I think, turn to museums for. And I was thinking also when I arrived in for the first time on this trip, I drove past the National Palace Museum, and I started to think about you know, what is a National Palace Museum? It's like a royal collection or something that's been nationalized. And I've been rereading Boris Groys recently to help with this work, and you know, I think here is a very straightforward example of you know, that's the afterlife of sovereignty, right? The museum is where sovereignty goes to die or goes to be buried. In a way, I think this is putting it in absurdly Groysian terms, but I think what happens with viewers in galleries might be one way to think about it. That the attention that governs the consumption of art is the attention of the zombie scroller on Facebook or Instagram, right? And people do something else in these places sometimes, but they can always, at any time, switch back into that. And of course, we, as you know, frequent museum visitors, I think also are in exactly the same state, right? That our attention can be lifted from the artwork in front of us at any time. There's something in this, the ease with which you might stop looking at art, the ease with which you might turn your attention away from the artwork, that I think is maybe where I would try to look for it, right? That there is that the viewer is somehow sovereign. And this brings me back to Blanchot. He wrote an absolutely unforgettable short essay called Orpheus's Gaze. It's also reproduced in the space of literature, where he talks about Orpheus going into the underworld and basically the glance, Orpheus's glance back. You know, the one thing he's not allowed to do is look, and he looks, and this undoes the work. And I think that undoing of the work is exactly the sovereign moment that Blanchot is also talking about in the quote that I started with.
Sorry, if I need to articulate a little bit more. Like what I was actually asking, there's two differences of sovereignty. You know what Maurice Blanchot was talking about sovereignty of the work, and then there's a differences of sovereignty of the author. I think the Orpheus Gaze is more related. I think, in my understanding, it's more related to sovereignty of the authors, the process of the revisiting the work. But I think the work itself, what he mostly mentioned in the space of literature, that is definitely related to the sovereignty of work that is somehow has to be liberated from the author, right?
From the author.
So what I was asking, like how you, I mean, these are sort of like constantly oscillate in your presentations, and I was kind of trying to understand how it can be navigated in this kind of complex, the cinema works, and it's I think it's somehow it is existing as a fuse itself, but then the author, the sovereign of the work, it may be the center to understand what you actually bring on. But I think that when you kind of combine with this kind of sovereignty author, then I don't know, like it's become a little bit obscure in some point actually. So that was somehow like my question.
I mean, I would underscore this idea of the sovereign medium, actually, and there's of course a pun there on the word medium, because another form of this enactment of sovereignty is channeling the spiritual, but I'm thinking more actually about if we take the Apichatpong film, it's the cinema itself, and I mean that in the kind of academic sense of a broad, the broad church of the cinema, the medium as a whole, right, which of course is an abstraction, that is of course collective, that is massive, that is transnational, etc., right? It's that which is making the offering in that case. And if you look at the flip side, the instrumentalization by the palace of the moving image, they need that too. It takes the form of, for example, the Royal Society of Photography, right, which King Bhumibol, who was an avid photographer, was the patron of, and which became an incredibly important institution in the society, right? So there's a sense in which the medium sort of comes to personify this sovereignty. So I'm not sure that the sovereignty of the artwork, in Blanchot's sense, is necessarily the be-all and end-all of this. I think that the medium, in its own right, maybe needs to be theorized as having a stake, or as taking a stake in this.
네, 굉장히 갑자기 어려워지는 것 같은데요. 네, 사실 뭐 어떻게 보면 미학의 출발점은 뭐 예전에 헤겔이 어떻게 헤겔의 책에서부터 시작되는 것 같기도 하고요. 그러면 그 전에는 미학이라는 것이 없었을까? 있었겠지만 의식적으로 그것을 저희가 대상화하지 않았었던 거일 수도 있을 것 같습니다. 예전에 장리 꼬다르가 그런 얘기를 했어요. 아프리카에는 예술이 없다라고. 아마도 현대를 얘기하는 것 같지는 않고요. 작가가 등장하지 않았던 시대의 예술폼을 겨냥해서 했던 얘기인 것 같습니다. 그래서 제 개인적인 생각에는 그 작가가 스스로 자율적이고 독립적인 그런 의식을 창작자로서 굉장히 쉽게 얘기하자면 갖고 있지 않다면 좀 다른 문제가 되겠죠. 과연 거기에 주권이 성립할 수 있을까? 뭐 이런 되게 도덕적인 비판의 어떤 잣대를 들이댈 수도 있겠죠. 그렇지만 지금 저희가 얘기하는 주권이라는 부분은 소유의 개념과도 연결되는 것 같기도 합니다. 즉 과연 그러한 결과물을 누가 소유하느냐의 문제, 저작권이 되는 것 같은데, 그러니까 예술적 행동을 하는 주체와 관련된 문제가 아니라 결과물에 대해서 과연 누가 소유를 할 것이냐에 대한, 그리고 그것이 이제 복잡하게 나라별, 시대별로 어떤 체제 하에서 대단히 다양한 형태가 나온다라는 부분이 있는 것 같고, 아마도 데뷔타님은 그런 점에서 그 극단적인, 좀 어떻게 보면 극단적이면서도 또 굉장히 세밀한 분석을 요하는 그런 예를 들어주신 것 같기도 합니다. 짧게 답을 듣고요. 이제 조금 머리를 식힌 다음에 디스커션을 이어갔으면 합니다.